Imagine being trapped, not just, physically locked away, but trapped inside a system that tells you your reality is a delusion,
Mm-hmm.
where everything you say, every attempt to explain what's happening to you just gets twisted into more proof that you're mad.
Yeah, it's a chilling thought.
Picture a tiny, suffocating cell. The windows sealed shut, maybe broken, it's winter, the heating's off, and you're just freezing all the time.
Right.
Maybe you're even wearing one of those awful open-backed shirts, exposed and degrading.
And then add the other layer he described.
Exactly, that chilling sensation of being sedated and gassed,
Yeah.
feeling your mind cloud up, your body get weak, your sense of who you even are just eroding.
It's a deeply disturbing image he paints.
Today, we're diving deep into an account like that, an unsettling story from inside a system that, well, some people described as a Blacksite.
Welcome to the deep dive. Yet today, we're taking a very specific journey. It's tailored around the deeply personal and, frankly, profoundly disturbing experiences of one individual. We're calling him the buyer.
Right, the buyer.
Our sources are his own memoirs, his writings, and other documents he's provided. They detail about a decade-long ordeal inside what he calls a German Straf psychiatry.
Straf psychiatry. Can you unpack that term a bit?
Sure. It essentially means a forensic or penal psychiatric institution. So it's a place where people are detained not just for mental health treatment, but often because they've committed an offense, however minor sometimes. It really blurs the lines between medical care and, well, punishment.
Okay, so that distinction is key. And our mission today for this deep dive.
Our mission is really to understand the buyer's path of suffering, as he alleges it happened. We need to explore his very stark critique of psychology. He calls it a malicious, ineffective pseudoscience.
That's strong language.
It is. And we'll get into his harrowing descriptions of the coercive measures he claims he faced. We're talking forced medication, poisoning, even gassing.
It's a look at how he claims his whole identity, his reality, even his physical body were targeted within the system. It's all presented through his eyes, based on his documents.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's crucial to remember, this is his narrative. It's a highly contested, deeply disturbing story, and we're presenting it as he tells it.
Got it. A journey into a very dark narrative indeed.
Okay, so where does this all begin for the buyer? It starts with something, well, pretty extraordinary, what he calls the state succession deed.
Right. This deed, it sounds almost like something out of a novel. He claims that back in 1998, he signed a document.
Mm-hmm.
He thought it was just for buying a NATO military property in Zweibrücken, straightforward real estate deal.
Seems simple enough on the surface.
But what he says he found out later is just staggering. His interpretation is that this contract, through what he calls legal trickery, didn't just transfer property. It supposedly transferred the sovereign rights of all UN and NATO states to him.
To him personally.
Yeah.
So according to the buyer's account, this legally made him a king, or at least a sovereign, over all these nations.
Wow.
And he suggests this wasn't something he sought out. He frames it as a meticulously orchestrated event, not his own ambition.
Okay, so he's suddenly, in his view, this global sovereign. What happens next?
Well, he describes being relentlessly pursued by the German state because of this alleged acquisition. This, he says, forced him into studying law himself, self-taught, autodidactic.
Right.
And through this process, he claims he came to the realization that he was, in fact, already sovereign.
And this is where the conspiracy element really kicks in, isn't it? He doesn't see this as random.
Not at all. He asserts that intelligence agencies were behind the whole thing, manipulating events, playing with his life, using him, as he sees it, like an unwitting pawn.
A pawn in what, exactly?
In a much larger long-running scheme, he believes, aimed at establishing a new world order. He says he was caught in an extortionate situation, basically trapped, unable to act on his perceived new status.
Okay, so that's the bizarre, almost unbelievable backdrop. How does this lead to his actual confinement?
It culminates in what he calls the knife incident. He recounts pulling a knife from someone's throat.
A violent act.
A very violent act. But surprisingly, he doesn't describe it as impulsive. He frames it as a deliberate provocation, planned by these intelligence services he talks about.
A provocation? To what end?
Their goal, he claims, was to create a pretext, a reason to imprison him and, crucially, his mother, potentially forever.
His mother. How is she involved?
He states she wasn't actively involved in the stabbing itself, but she was implicated somehow and also detained. He goes into detail about her being held unlawfully, in his view, at the Wenkebach Hospital, another forensic psychiatric facility.
For how long?
For 6 weeks, he says. And during that time, she allegedly endured 5-point fixation and forced medication, just like he later did.
That's brutal.
And he adds another layer. He claims the chief physician there explicitly threatened him, saying his mother would be held for decades unless he filed a lawsuit. He saw this as coercion, designed to force him to engage legally and, in doing so, extract international jurisdiction from him.
So pressure through his mother? Then what happens to him?
He's transferred to the Krankenhaus des Maßregelvollzugs, the KMV, in Berlin. Now, this is officially a forensic, psychiatric, hospital, treatment-focused, technically distinct from prison.
But that's not how he saw it.
Not at all. He calls it Blacksite 2.0, a secret prison disguised as a hospital. He draws these really disturbing parallels to Stasi methods or old Soviet psychiatric facilities.
And he mentions the legal basis, Section 63.
Yes, Section 63 of the German Criminal Code. This law allows for indefinite detention if someone's deemed mentally ill and dangerous, often after a crime. The intention is public safety and rehabilitation, but the Bayer's story raises serious questions about how it's applied.
Indefinite detention.
Exactly. He says patients are just labeled insane and locked away, often for relatively minor offenses. He points to that example he encountered.
Yeah.
A patient held for 42 years just for stealing 2 bottles of vodka.
42 years? That's
Yeah.
hard to comprehend.
The disproportion, in his view, is staggering.
Yeah.
And it sets the stage for his own experience there.
So what was his immediate experience like when he arrived at the KMV?
Horrifying, according to his account. He immediately faced 14 days of 5-point fixation.
That's the one where they strap down your arms, legs, torso.
Precisely. 7 days in Wenkebach, then another 7 in a different facility in Neukölln. He says this extreme restraint led to total muscle atrophy.
So severe he couldn't walk.
He needed a wheelchair temporarily, yes. And he claims the physical pain lasted for 6 months. He's adamant this wasn't justified by any aggression. He calls it pure revenge and torture.
And his mother went through something similar, you said.
6 weeks of 5-point fixation, he claims she endured.
The humiliation must have been immense.
He describes it vividly, being forced to use a piss duck, a urinal bottle, while strapped down. And he says he deliberately held his bowels for the full 14 days to avoid the degradation of being wiped by staff.
My God.
And alongside the physical restraint, there was the chemical aspect right away. He says he was pumped full of the strongest psychopharmaceuticals. He calls it chemical fixation or sometimes concrete injections.
Concrete injection.
Yeah, implying they were heavy-duty, immobilizing. He even recounts this chilling moment with a doctor during an injection.
What happened?
He claims the doctor deliberately rotated the syringe 360 degrees while injecting him, leaving a huge bruise like 10 centimeters across, and then taunted him, saying, "That was my boss you stabbed."
That's incredibly vindictive, if true.
It paints a picture of immediate, intense chemical intervention framed as punishment, as torture, right from the very beginning of his confinement.
So the buyer's experience inside the system, it didn't just expose him to it, it fundamentally shaped his views on the entire field of psychology, didn't it?
Absolutely. It hardened into a deep conviction that the system itself is rooted in malice and driven by self-serving financial interests.
Malice, that's a strong charge. How does he support that?
Well, he points directly to this concept Lynn Peyer wrote about back in '92, disease-mongering.
Disease-monger, and what's that exactly?
The basic idea, as the buyer presents it, is that pharmaceutical companies, doctors' associations, psychotherapists, even lawyers, they all have a vested interest in creating and defining new mental illnesses.
Right, for profit.
Essentially, yes. More diagnoses mean more treatments, more drugs, more therapy sessions. He sees it as a massive engine driving the mental health industry.
And he connects this to the drugs themselves.
Definitely. He calls psychopharmaceuticals big business with snake oil. He's incredibly skeptical about their effectiveness.
What does he say about them?
He claims the only thing they guarantee is severe side effects. Any actual healing, he argues, is highly questionable, maybe even non-existent.
And he points to the scale of the issue.
Yeah, he cites figures like Germany losing 132 million workdays in 2022 just due to psychological stress. He sees that as creating this huge market for what he flatly calls pseudoscience.
Pseudoscience. So he doesn't believe in the diagnostic process either.
Not really. He claims people are too quickly declared psychologically ill, even for things like temporary exhaustion or burnout.
And the response is medication.
Often, yes.
Yeah.
In his view, psychologists are too quick to prescribe antidepressants, maybe not for genuine healing, but just to keep people functional, productive in the workforce.
So a system prioritizing productivity over well-being.
That's how he frames it, yes.
Yeah.
Often at the individual's expense, potentially causing harm through side effects or masking deeper issues.
Which leads us to his really strong stance on therapy and medication effectiveness.
Incredibly strong. He states, quite bluntly, that no one has ever become less crazy through talk therapy. Period.
No one.
Ever. That's his firm belief. He even goes after Sigmund Freud, calls him obviously insane himself for, his methods like using cocaine and wine with patients, his focus on sexuality.
And the core idea of talk therapy.
He dismisses it as a delusional thesis, this idea that just talking can cure madness.
What's his evidence for this sweeping claim? How does he back that up?
His main argument comes from his observations within the KMV, the long-term patients.
The ones who'd been there for decades.
Exactly. He points to people confined for 20, 30, even 40 years. They've had, as he puts it, the full KMV dose, every kind of therapy, maximum medication.
And yet,
he says, they remained completely crazy. For him, this is proof positive that all these interventions are absolutely useless. They don't cure anything.
Does he give examples of therapy he found particularly useless?
He does. He mentions things he considered bizarre or just unhelpful advice from psychologists, like telling one patient to try making pig noises just to do something different.
Pig noises?
Yeah, or teaching another patient to visualize and wear an imaginary protective cloak when feeling stressed.
Yeah.
He sees these as absurdities.
So these golden words of therapy, as some might call them, he sees them as utterly empty.
Completely futile for treating actual madness. He concedes therapy might be okay for venting, like talking to a friend or a pastor maybe, but no real solutions for what he considers genuine insanity.
And the drugs, what's their role if not healing?
Purely control, in his view. He argues that for people who aren't actually crazy, psychopharmaceuticals have zero positive psychological effect. Their only impact is the side effects.
Which are?
Profound sedation, a constantly clouded mind, general malaise. Basically, he says, turning you into a vegetable in the head. It's not treatment, it's chemical incapacitation.
So his critique goes right to the core of psychology itself.
Right down to the foundations.
Yeah.
He dismisses it entirely as an unprovable pseudoscience. He claims 100% of psychology's accumulated knowledge relies purely on unproven theories, assumptions, speculations, no hard evidence.
What about diagnostic tools, things like psychopathy checklists?
He specifically mentions the PCLR, the Psychopathy Checklist Revised. It's a standard tool in forensic settings.
And his take?
He argues it's inherently flawed. Why? Because subjects can just lie. He believes this possibility invalidates the whole test, makes it meaningless as a knockout criterion for validity.
That's a fundamental challenge to its use.
It is. And he contrasts this, quite strikingly, with what he sees as the real future of understanding the mind.
Which is?
Brain research, artificial intelligence, brain-computer interfaces, BCIs, quantum computing. He thinks these fields hold the actual promise for genuinely understanding human emotions, decisions, learning.
He trusts AI more than humans.
He explicitly says that, yeah, because of its objectivity and rapid development potential. He points to the Moderna vaccine being developed with AI in just 3 days as an example of this superior capability he envisions.
Okay, so within this view of psychology as flawed and potentially malicious, how does he explain his own diagnosis?
He sees it as deliberate misdiagnosis and manipulation, part of the larger pattern.
He reiterates that people get labeled psychologically ill too quickly.
Yes, even for temporary exhaustion. But more disturbingly, he gives specific examples where his actions, he claims, were intentionally twisted to look like madness.
Like the I am God statement.
Exactly. He says things like, I am God, or kneel down, were meant, ironically, over-the-top insults to shut down a conversation or show contempt.
But they were diagnosed as
Megalomania, taken literally as proof of delusions of grandeur.
What other examples?
His physical fitness routine. He trained intensely with water bottles in his room. This was apparently cited as proof of his craziness.
Which he found absurd.
Yeah, he basically says, well, does that mean all fitness club visitors are insane too? It's about twisting normal or understandable behavior?
And the hygiene allegations?
That one seems particularly insidious. He alleges stories about poor hygiene, like urinating outside the toilet, were fabricated and pinned on him.
Why?
To paint him as neglected or degenerating Warlost, even though he insists he's meticulously clean. He claims other patients were responsible, but the blame was shifted to him in the official records.
And his refusal to accept the diagnosis or medication? How did they use that?
As further proof, It was twisted into evidence of his lack of insight into illness. It's a classic catch-22, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you deny you're ill, it just proves how ill you are.
It seems designed to keep you trapped.
And he identifies what he calls the ultimate trick in this system.
Which
He claims the KMV intentionally provokes patients, pushes them until they display crazy behavior.
Can you give an example from his experience?
His primary example is the alleged poisoning and gassing. He says experiencing these real physical attacks naturally led him to express fears or fantasies about being poisoned.
Which sounds like a rational response to what he says was happening.
Exactly. But his expression of these fears, stemming from what he insists was reality, was then immediately seized upon by the system.
Seized upon how?
As grounds for forced medication and extending his detention. He sees it as a deliberate setup, provoke a reaction, then use that reaction to justify illegal actions and keep him locked up suffering. It's a core part of his narrative of malicious manipulation.
Okay, so the buyer's narrative really descends into some dark places now. We're talking about the coercive measures, the physical abuse he alleges. This seems central to his claim of malice.
Absolutely central. He begins with what he describes as systematic poisoning and gassing. This isn't just a side issue for him. It's a core element of the torment he endured.
Systematic.
Yeah.
How does he describe this happening?
He claims it was pervasive. Through his food, his drinks, he even mentions officially sealed water bottles being tampered with, and his toothpaste, all allegedly laced with psychopharmaceuticals.
So he felt constantly under chemical assault.
Yes, which forced him into desperate measures, like rationing his intake, trying to find anything safe to consume.
And the water supply. You mentioned something specific there.
Right, what he calls the water war. He says the KMV brought in new rules limiting access to clinic water. As a self-caterer, this forced him onto tap water.
Okay.
And then, he recounts, staff began systematically poisoning the tap water sources one by one. First the bathroom tap, then the communal kitchen, then the laundry room.
Actively cutting off his options?
Exactly, forcing him into increasingly conspicuous efforts to find any untainted water, which he says quickly became impossible.
So when the water sources were gone, what happened then?
That's when he says the direct gassing started. Targeted gassing, specifically in his room, on a daily basis.
How did that work?
He describes gas streaming into his cell, but the timing would vary. This made it impossible to predict or escape once he started feeling the effects.
The psychological effect of that must have been immense.
He says it led to intense anger, even thoughts of violence against the staff administering it. The sheer relentlessness of these alleged attacks is fundamental to his account of suffering.
What were the physical effects he experienced from all this alleged poisoning and gassing?
He describes profound physical deterioration, acute sedation, a constant mental fog, significant weight loss. He uses the term KZ style.
Referencing concentration camp victims.
Yes, that emaciated look. Also pale skin, deep dark circles under his eyes. He looked, in his words, like freshly released from a concentration camp.
And the system's response to his appearance.
This is crucial. He claims these very symptoms, caused by the alleged abuse, were then documented in his medical reports.
Documented as what?
As proof of Verwahrlosung, that German term for neglect or degeneration. So the effects of the abuse were twisted into justification for more confinement.
It's a horrifying feedback loop he's describing. How did he try to confirm this was really happening, that he wasn't imagining it?
This leads to a really difficult part of his story. He recounts a desperate act.
What did he do?
He confesses to giving some instant coffee, which he believed was poisoned, to a fellow patient.
Why?
This patient was an Egyptian immigrant who apparently drank a lot of coffee and wasn't on other medications. The buyer wanted to see if the coffee had the same effect on someone else. He calls it using the other patient as a crash test dummy.
That's ethically very challenging. What did he observe?
He says he watched the other patient become clearly sedated, lethargic, unable to focus. For the buyer, this confirmed the coffee was poisoned and validated his own horrifying experience.
Okay, so beyond the alleged poisoning and gassing, there was the forced medication itself. He calls it chemical torture.
Yes, and he emphasizes the duration. He claims he was subjected to forced medication for 4 years.
4 years? Isn't that unusual?
He says it's far longer than the typical few weeks such orders usually last, and it was often administered through involuntary injections. He also claims he was kept in the dark about the legal orders for this, only learning about them when they were shouted through the hatch of his isolation cell.
He describes the experience in stark terms.
Extremely stark. Chemical torture, he repeats. He argues it's the highest stage of psychological torture, even worse than physical pain on a rack, because as he puts it, it penetrates the mind.
What specific side effects does he list?
It's a grim list: permanent sedation, mental emptiness, a total lack of joy, anhedonia, chronic constipation, severe stomach problems, extreme flatulence, and what he describes as most invasively, total impotence.
Impotence. He felt that was particularly degrading.
Deeply. He calls it a de facto castration, saying it made him feel worse than a notorious child molester.
Were there neurological effects, too?
Yes, really frightening ones. He recounts suffering epileptic seizures induced by the medication, collapsing, convulsions, even nearly biting off his tongue.
And the eye spasms.
The Blickkrampf. That sounds terrifying. He describes his eyes involuntarily rolling upwards for up to 3 hours at a time.
3 hours.
Yes, causing temporary blindness and this intense fear that the damage might become permanent. These are things he'd never experienced before the medication.
How does he summarize the overall effect?
He likens the effect of these drugs on someone not actually mad to chemical warfare, a profound violation of human rights. He finds the covert administration, the alleged poisoning, particularly perfidious, the worst of the all torments he endured daily.
So chemical and physical torment, and then there was isolation. How does he describe that?
As a deliberate strategy of psychological Zersetzung. That term implies systematic undermining, degradation, psychological warfare.
What were the conditions like in these isolation cells?
He paints a bleak picture. Small, suffocating. No fresh air. The windows were tiny, often sealed or just broken.
And temperature control.
He claims the heating was often off in winter, while the air conditioning ran constantly, so he was always freezing.
And the hygiene aspect you mentioned earlier, how did that play out in isolation?
It was weaponized, he claims. He says he was denied basic things like nail clippers, shavers, even a comb for 5 months straight.
A result.
He ended up looking wild, unkempt. And this appearance, he alleges, was then maliciously documented in his reports as more evidence of his insanity and neglect.
And the clothing.
Only those open-backed fixation shirts. He says they left his genitals exposed, became foul-smelling quickly, and no clean ones were provided. It adds another layer of humiliation.
What was the psychological impact of all this, particularly the alleged constant gassing and isolation?
Immense. He states that it was during this period, under these conditions, that he experienced serious suicidal thoughts for the very first time in his life.
He saw suicide as an escape.
Yes, an escape from what he felt was unbearable psychological and physical torture. He directly attributes these thoughts to the extreme distress imposed upon him.
Were there threats used against him?
He claims the threat of permanent isolation or even forced feeding was constantly held over him to compel him to take the medication voluntarily.
Beyond the immediate physical and psychological abuse, he also alleges legal and administrative abuses were happening.
Yes, a whole pattern of them. He states he was placed under guardianship betraying in German during this forced medication period.
What does betraying involve?
It's a legal arrangement where a guardian is appointed to manage the affairs of someone deemed unable to do so themselves, supposedly for their welfare.
But he wasn't aware of this.
He claims it happened without his knowledge or consent. He only found out years later. He suspects it was done to enable financial exploitation and give a veneer of legality to controlling his affairs. He mentions multiple guardianship procedures over the decades for both him and his mother.
That seems incredible that it could happen without his knowledge. What about access to legal help?
Denied, he says.
Yee.
He specifically requested an attorney, but claims he was refused permission to even make a phone call.
What was the reason given?
He was told he was too crazy to call.
Too crazy to call.
He also recounts this very suspicious incident involving a lawyer.
What happened?
He says a lawyer just appeared outside his observation window, supposedly by chance. He saw it as a blatant attempt to pressure him into signing over power of attorney while he was completely vulnerable in isolation.
And court rulings, how were those communicated?
He claims they were read to him by shouting through the hatch of his isolation cell. Completely unlawful in his view.
It sounds like he felt the whole legal process was corrupted.
Especially the psychiatric assessments. He sees them not as objective evaluations, but as tools repeatedly used to justify prolonging his confinement and forcing treatments.
How so?
His refusal to admit illness, his lack of cooperation with therapy, these were consistently cited as reasons to keep him locked up. He flatly alleges that corrupt psychologists can easily be bought to produce whatever diagnosis is needed, precisely because there's no hard, verifiable proof in psychology. the medical reports become weapons against the patient.
So beyond the direct actions of the staff in the system, the buyer points to another major source of suffering, just being forced to live 247 with the other patients, the madmen, as he refers to them.
Yes, he describes this compulsory coexistence as, in some ways, the greatest punishment of all in the KMV. It wasn't just the confinement itself.
What was it about the other patients that made it so difficult?
He describes them generally as insane, unpredictable, dangerous, and crucially, there was no escape. He mentions the arbitrariness of malicious KMV staff alongside the patients.
So a hostile environment on all fronts.
Pretty much. He talks about extremely difficult, menacing, annoying personalities among the patients and constant disputes, fights breaking out in communal areas, making any kind of relaxation impossible.
And these patients often lacked outside support.
That's another key point he makes. Most had little or no contact with the outside world. Abandoned, he says, by family and friends because of their madness or the crimes they'd committed.
Which meant
that, ironically, these very individuals became the buyer's main social circle, his primary human contact, apart from the staff.
And he found the staff even worse.
He states that, quite starkly, yes, the staff were even worse than the patients.
To give us a clearer picture, he provides some specific portraits of fellow inmates, doesn't he? Some pretty disturbing ones.
He does. They paint a grim picture of the variety and severity of issues within the KMV population.
Like who? Who stands out in his descriptions?
Well, there are those exhibiting extreme violence or ideologies. He mentions the patient he calls the von Weizsäcker killer.
The one who murdered the son of the former German president.
Yes. As perceived retribution for Agent Orange dealings allegedly involving the father, the buyer recounts this patient dying from a hunger strike inside the clinic.
And he blames the clinic.
He believes they allowed him to starve, didn't force feed him despite obvious deterioration. Then there was the Nazi.
Covered in swastika tattoos.
Yes, a self-proclaimed bomb expert sent NSU 2.0 style threat letters. The buyer also alleges he infected a pedophile inmate with AIDS while tattooing him and tattooed another without sterilizing needles.
Yet he was released.
After only 7 years, the buyer claims. He attributes this release to the patient allegedly paying €100 for protected oral sex with the 42-year patient who had AIDS and hepatitis C, implying that money trumped ideology for him.
That's quite a story. What about patients suffering from long-term institutionalization or severe illness?
He details the really tragic case of the 42-year patient. Remember, the one imprisoned since age 17 for stealing 2 vodka bottles.
42 years for that.
The buyer calls the confinement totally disproportionate, even while acknowledging the man was undoubtedly crazy. He also described this patient's very disturbing fetish involving contaminated toilet brushes.
And his health.
He suffered from advanced AIDS and hepatitis C, likely from drug use, and died in hospice shortly after finally being released. The buyer implies his health was severely neglected over the decades.
He also mentions a roommate.
Yes, the Geräuscherte, the noisy one. So heavily medicated he was oblivious, caused small fires with his tobacco tin, drank coffee with cigarette butts and ash after someone dumped an ashtray in it out of frustration with the smoke, just completely out of it.
And others involved in crime or ending tragically.
There was the fat pedophile who he says anally raped his son and later committed suicide by jumping from a hotel window while on leave. And Demon.
The demon.
The thief and dealer.
Yes, a serial thief using a butter knife to pick locks on patients' rooms, stealing money. The buyer highlights how Demon's crimes often weren't prosecuted.
Why not?
Because he was already detained under Section 63. The logic apparently was that he couldn't receive a greater punishment, so why bother? The buyer sees this as the system enabling more crime. He also notes Demon had a breakdown when the buyer reported another patient who planned to stab Demon for stealing. Quite the cast of characters.
Yeah.
Any others?
He mentions Asadin, the Schendling, or beautiful one, who had LSD-induced delusions about murdering his ex-wife to spark revolution in Iran, and the Toy Boy, who serially formed relationships with older wealthy women in the KMV, got escaped with one, got betrayed, then got involved in sexual acts for money and drug dealing inside.
It sounds like a chaotic and dangerous environment. What about the basic daily realities of life there? Food, money, rules.
Pretty bleak, according to him. The food was bland, reheated microwave hospital food for 10 years, he says, until he could afford self-catering via delivery.
And money. Did they have any?
Very limited pocket money. It rose slowly from under €100 to maybe just over €150 a month, but there's a catch.
What was that?
They were punished for saving. If you accumulated over 1,000 euros in a communal account or had over 300 euros in cash, your pocket money payments were suspended until your savings dropped below that level.
So they actively prevented patients from building any kind of financial cushion.
Exactly. Made it almost impossible to save for potential life outside. Even the annual clothes money, around 250 euros, he says, was rarely used for clothes because many patients couldn't manage money and just squandered it.
What about personal possessions? What were the rules?
Extremely strict, draconian even. Limits on everything.
Yeah.
Max, 10 films, 10 games, 10 music CDs, no cell phones, no computers, no internet access, which he calls the most unpleasant restriction.
No contact with the outside world digitally.
Basically none. Wi-Fi was disabled on any personal TVs or consoles they might eventually get permission for. USB ports were sealed shut. MP3 players couldn't have microphones.
And room searches.
Regular searches, fills-in, were common and unpopular. He even makes the extraordinary claim that the KMB buildings themselves were technically his property due to the state succession deed, meaning he was being held captive in his own building.
His final verdict on the staff, we touched on it, but it's scathing.
Absolutely scathing. Unmotivated, lazy, playing games on their phones. He mentions an unbelievably high sick leave rate, leading to minimal staffing despite the place being overcrowded.
Even though it cost a lot per patient.
Yes. He cites the cost as 500 euros per patient per day. Yet he describes the staff as people haters, corrupt, unscrupulous, seeming to enjoy the power they had to terrorize patients. He even says the psychologists were the sickest, and he and other patients mocked them.
His conclusion about working there.
That you either have to be born deeply evil or the system itself twists you into becoming malicious. It's a damning indictment of the entire KMV environment.
Okay, so we've heard about the personal torment, the daily grind, the difficult interactions, but the buyer connects all this to something much bigger, doesn't he? A grand political conspiracy.
He absolutely does. His narrative insists that his personal suffering isn't just a case of medical malpractice or institutional failure. It's a deliberate, calculated piece of a larger political puzzle. This is where his claims really scale up to the geopolitical level.
And it all ties back to that state succession deed.
Fundamentally, yes.
Yeah.
At the core is his claim that his detention, his diagnosis of madness, it was all strategically necessary for a political agenda aimed at establishing this new world order. We have to stress again, these are his claims, not validated by mainstream sources, but they are central to how he understands everything that happened.
How did the diagnosis serve that purpose, in his view?
He believes it was the calculated reason for his confinement. Its purpose was to disqualify him as a potential future head of state based on that deed, and to utterly isolate him.
To strip him of any credibility or support.
Exactly. If he's officially labeled a madman, who's going to listen to him? Who, from the public, the press, or politics, would support him? He's rendered powerless, dismissed as scum, he says.
And the guardianship, the betrung, how does that fit into the conspiracy?
He alleges it wasn't about his welfare at all. He claims it was a legal tool used, without his knowledge, to plunder his assets and, crucially, to legitimize the system's actions in his name.
So they could control his affairs and make it look legal.
That's his argument. It enabled them, he believes, to lock him away forever, under the guise of being a dangerous lunatic, while managing his resources. He sees the judiciary as complicit in this.
Complicit how?
Through the expert psychological reports. He insists they weren't neutral assessments, but were essentially purchased or manipulated to always justify forced treatments as being without alternative, even when, he claims, he showed no actual psychotic symptoms.
This leads him to his really big claim about psychiatry itself.
Yes, that forensic psychiatry in particular is used as a political combat tool.
A weapon.
A political weapon. And he draws these explicit, very chilling historical parallels.
To Nazi Germany.
Directly. He compares the current Straf psychiatry system, as he experienced it, to how psychiatry was abused under the Nazis, how psychiatric reports were used back then to justify locking up and even murdering political opponents, undesirables, people labeled with vague terms like idiocy or insanity.
That's an incredibly serious comparison.
It is. He argues that German forensic psychiatry today, hiding behind its medical facade, systematically suppresses opposition. He points to what he calls inhumane practices, the long-term fixation, the isolation, the forced drugging, the biased expert opinions, all done under the banner of public safety.
But really, in his view, it's about control.
Yes, designed to delegitimize critical voices, pathologize dissent, and ultimately cement authoritarian power structures.
And he claims specific laws are misused for this.
He does. He mentions laws related to deprivation of liberty, Section 239 STGB, coercion 240, bodily harm, Section 223, even forming terrorist organizations, Section 129A. He argues these laws, sometimes vaguely written, are instrumentalized within forensic psychiatry
How are they instrumentalized?
to justify arbitrary actions like isolation, fixation, forced medication against people who challenge the system. It allows the state, he claims, to pathologize and disempower individuals critical of its power.
And he believes there's a network coordinating this.
Yes, what he calls a network of control. He alleges that personnel across the justice system, politics, the expert witnesses who write reports, and security authorities are all intertwined.
A closed repression apparatus.
That's his term for it. He claims this network operates through secret parallel communication channels. They selectively share information, maybe even falsify reports, suppress inconvenient facts, all to maintain their power and legitimize these repressive measures.
Does he see technology playing a role?
He does. He mentions the increasing digitalization of forensic psychiatry. While it might look like it's about efficiency, he warns it creates enhanced surveillance capabilities.
Surveillance that isn't properly regulated.
Exactly. Not subject to transparent oversight, he argues. It effectively creates a surveillance state in miniature, reinforcing the system's ability to operate without real external accountability. It's a comprehensive picture of a system designed, in his view, for political control, not healing.
Despite everything we've heard, the decade of alleged suffering, the systematic abuse he describes the buyer also talks about an unyielding spirit, doesn't he? About how he managed to survive and resist.
He does, remarkably. He details specific strategies he employed, showcasing a certain resilience amidst the horror he describes.
Like his refusal to engage with therapy.
Exactly. He consciously refused to participate in therapy sessions or cooperate with expert evaluations. His stated reason is quite strategic.
What was it?
He believed that participating would allow his enemies, as he calls them, to learn his thought patterns, information they could then use against him to harm him more effectively with targeted psychological strategies.
So silence as a defense mechanism, did he employ other, more active strategies?
Yes, including some pretty controversial ones. He talks about intentionally feigning exaggerated madness at times.
Feigning madness, like the Nutella incident.
That's the most striking example he gives. Throwing an adult diaper filled with Nutella made to look like feces into another patient's cell as a supposed prank.
Why would he do that?
He suggests it was a way to manipulate the system, maybe confuse the staff, or perhaps even vent his own extreme frustration in an environment where genuine complaints were ignored or twisted. A kind of desperate performance art, maybe?
It speaks to the extreme circumstances. What about maintaining his mental faculties? He mentioned the sedation, the fog.
This is where his determination really shows. Despite the alleged constant sedation and mental fog from the gassing and poisoning, he actively sought intellectual stimulation.
How? Internet access was forbidden, right?
It was. But he recounts managing to get online using a fellow patient's illicit Xbox console.
Resourceful. What did he do online?
He says he devoured information. Popular science, AI, quantum computing, robotics, even longevity research. He saw it as a lifeline.
A way to fight back against the mental decline.
Precisely. To counteract the mental decay he felt was being induced by the medication and isolation. It allowed him, as he puts it, to leave the walls mentally, even if he couldn't physically.
Does he feel this whole ordeal changed him fundamentally?
Yes, but perhaps paradoxically. He believes the decades of inflicted damage, as he calls it, have inadvertently forged an extreme resilience in him, made him detached.
Detached how?
He says he no longer takes the personal attacks personally. He sees them now as just components of a larger impersonal plan targeting him.
And this perspective helps him.
He claims it gives him a clearer, more objective view of events. It allows him to see the hidden reasons, the alleged motivations behind the suffering inflicted upon him.
And he's channeling this into writing his memoirs now.
Yes, that's his main focus. Writing his story under difficult conditions, as he puts it. He claims he's still being subjected to gassing and poisoning even now.
Which makes writing difficult.
Extremely. He acknowledges experiencing short-term memory loss, difficulty staying on topic. He compares it to being a one-legged person trying to run the Berlin Marathon.
But he persists. What's his driving motivation?
To expose the truth, as he sees it. The unfathomable truth about the deep state, the NWO plot he believes he's caught in.
And his ultimate goal? Does he want revenge?
Interestingly, no. Despite everything he claims to have endured, he emphasizes his conscious decision not to seek revenge. He believes the intelligence services want him to desire revenge,
So what does he want instead?
peace, and a general amnesty. He believes this would sabotage what he sees as their divide and rule strategy, a strategy he fears is aimed at provoking a Third World War, originating from Germany.
It's quite a vision. Does he have hope for his own release?
He mentions the annual proportionality review, a legal check after 10 years of detention under Section 63 to see if confinement is still justified. He describes his annual hope for release at this review, a hope that's consistently denied, illustrating the immense power of the system he feels trapped within.
So after hearing all this incredibly detailed and disturbing account, what does it all mean for you listening right now? When we consider the buyer's story, it really forces us to ask a fundamental question, doesn't it?
It really does. How does a society actually define madness? And maybe even more critically, who benefits from that definition? Who holds the power to label?
This narrative throws into sharp relief the potential dangers, right? When that line between providing medical care and exercising state control gets blurry, especially in closed systems designed for the protection of the general public.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you take the buyer's claims at face value, even just hypothetically, if the golden words of talk therapy genuinely haven't cured madness, as he asserts, and if psychopharmaceuticals mainly just sedate and cause horrific side effects, what does that really say about our current understanding, our current treatment of mental illness? Are we missing something fundamental?
It also brings up that chilling possibility he raises. Could the real motives behind some systems actually be to perpetuate suffering, not alleviate it? Especially if you consider the geopolitical power and control context he insists on.
The buyer's claims are extraordinary, yes, and deeply troubling. But they compel us to think hard about truth, especially when powerful institutions control the narrative around someone's sanity, someone's freedom. How vigilant do we need to be?
Vigilant to protect basic human rights, to ensure there's real accountability within these systems that seem legitimate on the surface but might hide darker realities, especially when his account touches on those historical echoes of psychiatric abuse.
We've journeyed through a truly harrowing account today. From the buyer's almost unbelievable legal claims about sovereignty right down to his alleged daily battles for survival against a system he believes was engineered to break him.
We've heard his fierce accusations against the core tenets of psychology, the devastating effects he attributes to forced medication, and the pervasive institutional manipulation he describes.
This deep dive really challenges us, doesn't it? To think about that fine, maybe fragile line between care and control, particularly when so much power is concentrated within these closed, forensic psychiatric systems.
It leaves us with that deeply unsettling question. How can we possibly understand and protect the human mind when the very act of interpreting it can apparently be weaponized?
And here's a final thought to leave you with. If these deeply personal, deeply disturbing accounts reflect even a partial systemic truth, what foundations of our society, foundations we rely on for justice and care, might be much more fragile than we usually care to admit?